What's up, everybody? CHM Carnivorous here. I hope you're having a wonderful day and a wonderful week. Now, today I thought I'd do something very specific, and that is the normal life cycle process of a Nepenthes pitcher. What is a normal behavior? What does it normally do, part of its process? And what is abnormal? And hopefully this will help you ascertain whether or not your pitcher plant is growing fine or if there's something that you need to address. All that and more coming your way in just a second. See you soon. I'm going to turn the camera around and we're going to look at the different life cycles of a Nepenthes pitcher here in just a second. But before we get into that, what do you need to do, or what do you need to provide rather, in order to get your Nepenthes to pitcher and to keep those pitchers around? And there are three things, two of which are very important. The third is more of a tertiary importance. The first and most important thing is light. You want to make sure that you're providing your Nepenthes the proper amount of light in order to ensure that they start pitching for you and that those pitchers last. Now, Nepenthes like dappled light, and so if you're growing them outside, they want about 60% indirect light. So whatever that bright light is that you'd use for your Venus flytraps, you want to use about 60% of that. If you are inside a greenhouse, you can use a shade cloth. If you're outside, you just want to make sure they're not in direct light. Now, if you are growing them indoors with an LED light, you want to make sure that they have a PPFD range of between 80 and 100 on the low end, and they can go a little higher than that, but you don't want to get it too bright for the Nepenthes. The next thing is watering, and you want to make sure that they have ample amount of water, but that is on the media, not on the pitcher themselves, or especially not on the plant. Now, if you happen to be in an extremely humid environment, something sub 40%, you can help the pitchers along by misting the pitchers a little bit, but it is very critical that you do not get the misting water on the leaves themselves, as that can promote mold growth, especially if you don't have a lot of wind around them, a lot like a fan, or a lot of airflow rather. And the tertiary thing would be ambient humidity. And I say this is tertiary because it doesn't necessarily cause the pitcher to die off sooner at such a large rate that you'll be noticed. I will say that if you're extremely arid and extremely dry, your pitchers will either not develop all the way, which I'll show you in just a minute, or they could potentially, once fully developed, start to die off a little bit faster. But once they're developed and they have that water inside of them, they will hang on there pretty good. But the humidity is more important as they're developing. You want to keep that ambient humidity up. Now, this comes with a large caveat, because there are a lot of Nepenthes like truncata, ventricosa, Miranda that can be acclimated down to very low humidity levels. And so unless you're growing a plant that requires a lot of humidity, you may not notice this too much, but I will show you some cases here in just a minute of where they didn't get enough ambient humidity and what that looks like. And so let's go ahead and turn the camera around and look at the life cycle of a Nepenthes pitcher. What is normal and what is not? All right, so right off the bat, this is a Maxima wavy leaf. And right off the bat, you can see this is a normal growing Nepenthes. And so that pitcher is filling up with air and it will continue to grow. And so you see that the lid is nice and sealed and it is growing just fine. And so it has an absolutely, this is a perfect kind of Nepenthes pitcher that you'd want to see as it's growing. Now, it will continue to grow to probably, I don't know the exact number, but let's say 80% of its full growth before that lid will start to open, and then it will continue to grow a little bit after that. This is perfectly healthy. This is normal. This lets you know that this has gotten plenty of light. And the way you know that is it's actually developing pitchers. If it's not getting light, or if your plant is not producing pitchers at all, there could be several different reasons for that, but mostly the main culprit is it's not getting enough light. Now let me pan over. This is also getting enough humidity too. Let me pan over and show you what happens if you don't have enough humidity. Now, from time to time, this this grow tent will dry out, and so this is a perfect example of that. So if your pitchers are doing this, 9 times out of 10, the culprit is not enough humidity. And so it's got enough light, which is why it's producing pitchers, but the ambient humidity dropped very low in this tent, and as a result, the pitcher lid opened up prematurely, and so this is what you get, this sort of funky looking pitcher. Now this pitcher will continue to grow. It's not going to stop right here. It probably will not grow to full size like it would some of the other ones, but it will continue to grow nonetheless. But if you do see this, this lets you know that your ambient temperature is too low. All right, so now your pitcher has started to develop and it has opened up and you have a brand new beautiful pitcher. And so you would expect something like this, right? And depending on the species or hybrid that you have, the pitchers will last anywhere from a month to several months. So the harder the pitcher is, the longer it's going to last. But the caveat to that is the longer it takes to develop. So what should you expect if your pitcher starts to go out? So this is a perfect example. This is a Stenophylla. Now this is a harder, tougher pitcher. So this thing has been around for a while, but you can see that it is starting to fade, and see that line in the middle? That is where the watermark is of this plant. And so that you'll see that in just a few minutes, but that is where the pitcher starts to die off. It's sort of that watermark upwards. It will start to brown off. And so this is exactly what is happening here. This plant is starting that dying off process, and so it is it's going to keep this bottom healthy and green because of that water inside, but the top has no water in it and so those enzymes, and so it's going to start to die off. Now, one quick caveat to that, I'm going to show you this plant right here. Now this is a little harder to tell, but I wanted to put this in there for this video. This pitcher is uniformly brown, which means that it is completely dead, and I will be cutting it off. This one died out much quicker because I have been feeding it. If you feed your pitchers, especially like an Osmocote pellet or something like that, they will die off faster because the plant has utilized that pitcher to get the nutrients that it needs, and so it's not going to waste any more energy keeping it around. Also, the nitrogen in the food that you feed it, depending on how strong it is, will burn the inside layers of that pitcher, and so it will kill it off. That is perfectly natural and okay. That's why I always encourage people, if you're going to feed your Nepenthes pitchers, feed them with the pitchers that are on their way out, and that way you don't ruin any of your nice beautiful ones. But let's look at the next stage. So here's the first stage of this plant starting to go out. Let's look at the next stage. So here is the next stage of that Nepenthes pitcher die-off. You'll see that the lid is starting to turn brown. Sometimes this happens before the mid rib, if you will, starts to brown up. Also, sometimes you'll notice that the lid will start to die off first as well. Basically, the rule of thumb is this: wherever the water level is and wherever that water is most prevalent, that pitcher is going to last the longest, and that's advantageous for the plant. It's going to kill off the parts that it doesn't need and that is taking up energy, and it's going to keep the part that stays moisturized, if you will. And so right here, sometimes you'll notice the first signs of death of the pitcher, if you will, is this browning of the peristome, and sort of the lid itself will also start to die off. Now, what can you expect as the pitcher starts to die off? Let me see if I've got one here. It'll start looking like this. Now, this is a little bit further along because I was feeding this pitcher, but notice here that it's got a very clear line of demarcation there, and that is because that lower part still has fluid. Now, this is very much a viable pitcher. Some people, if you're more into the aesthetic side, you can cut off this brown part and just keep this bottom, but not really necessary. This plant, or this pitcher, is still very much viable and can still be fed. And so if you are going to feed your plant, I recommend you using something like this because this pitcher is already on its way out and you don't want to ruin your new growth. But absolutely, this is completely normal in the life cycle of the pitcher. It's starting to kill off the part it doesn't need, and it's going to keep this bottom part as long as possible, just in case it catches some more insects. Now let's look at the next stage. This is a Nepenthes truncata, and it is very much on to the final stage of the pitchers. There's one more stage after this, but this is the pitcher die-off. Now, this plant has been fed multiple times through this pitcher, and so it has taken a lot of nitrogen inside, and so it has quickened the rate of death. But truncata pitchers are very tough, and so they can handle quite a bit. But as you can see, even though it's aggressively browning on the top, that bottom still has just a little bit left. And so this pitcher is still very much viable. Now, you can cut it off at this point if you like, if you have other pitchers, but I want the pitcher plant to be able to utilize all the energy it can. And so I'm going to continue to feed using this pitcher until it completely goes brown. So at this point, it is still viable, although not very much remains, but still very much able to take in nutrients. Here is an example of a pitcher that is completely used up. You'll notice that it's completely brown. And so at that point, probably a little bit before this point, that pitcher no longer serves any purpose for the plant and can be cut off. Now, when you cut it off, you can cut it off. Now, this leaf is completely dead, so I'll cut the leaf off. But if you're going to cut the pitchers off, you can cut them all the way up at the tendrils top. I have seen people cut it off at the bottom. It's not necessary. You can cut it off the top and you can be just fine. That's where I cut them, and they do just fine. If you are worried about, always sterilize your cutting utensils, but if you are worried about it, you can always cut it a little bit lower. That way you have a chance to catch any sort of fungal infection that might set in from the cutting utensil. Now, after this stage, you're going to get to the point where the pitcher turns completely wrinkled like this. And at this point, it's just fodder and can be cut off. And it is important, actually, that you do cut these off. And so this is overdue for a trim. And the reason why that is important is because it can, depending on how much you have on there, it can hinder the airflow around the plant. Let me get it back in focus. It can hinder the airflow around the plant, which can introduce mold at the base of the plant and can cause a lot of issues. So if this was more towards the bottom of the plant and or in an area where it was very bushy with this stuff, I would suggest cutting them off, because that is going to help prevent any sort of mold issues by getting adequate airflow to the plant. And here's an example. Again, I've got to come in here and do some trimming, but once this pitcher has reached that browning stage, especially if the ambient temperature is high, you're going to start seeing mold grow on it. And so you want to get rid of these as quick as possible. I'll cut that off, and that will prevent that mold from spreading anywhere else onto the plant. Very unlikely that it would, but it's a possibility. And you also just want to make sure that you get it off of there just because it's unsightly. And if you had a whole lot of these, then it's not going to allow airflow to the plant. Well, I hope that helps. That's a very short, but it also is a very concise example of what the natural life cycle of a Nepenthes pitcher is and how you ensure that your pitchers last as long as possible and get them to pitcher in the first place. Now, you'll notice that there wasn't a whole lot of don'ts or a whole lot of not normals that I talked about, and there's a reason for that. The not normal occurs normally in the first part of development of the pitcher. And so the plant is putting forth all this energy, and as long as you have enough humidity and as long as you give it enough light, it will continue to develop and it will be just fine. And once it fully develops and it has all that liquid inside of it, it is a lot more hardy than you think. You want to keep humidity up as much as possible, but you can get down into the 40-50% and do just fine, especially if it's a tougher pitcher. The hardest part, I won't even say the hardest part, the most critical part rather, is in the beginning stages. That's where you want to make sure that you've got the right climate for the plant. Now, there are some times that the pitcher, you might have the perfect humidity, you might have the greatest light, and these plants still won't produce pitchers. There's a couple of reasons for that. One could be that it already has enough nutrients. And so if you've been feeding your plant regularly through other pitchers and it has all the nitrogen it needs, it's not going to put forth the effort to produce the pitchers because it doesn't need it. And the plant is going to do whatever it has to do to survive. And if it has the nutrients, it has no need to produce the pitchers. The second thing is it might be working on a basal. And so if it is working on a basal, it's going to put its energy towards that plant. Now, it could very well continue to pitcher even when it's producing a basal, but sometimes the plant, depending on its mood, will focus all of its attention on that basal and will stop pitcher production. That is okay. What I tell people who ask, as long as the plant looks healthy, you are all good. The plant will let you know very quickly whether or not it is happy with its conditions. And while the pitcher production is a sign that it is not happy, there will be other signs that earlier, like leaves drooping, curling at the edges, that will let you know that the plant is not happy far before you realize the pitcher is not pitchering for you. I hope all this information has been very helpful for you. If you have any questions, please don't hesitate to ask. And as always, I hope you have a wonderful day and a wonderful week. I'll see you soon.